Hello everyone, greetings from VNR JYOTHI Institute of Engineering and Technology. This is Manohar Reddy, Department of Cybersecurity, Data Science and AIDS. Today in this session I am going to explain about the concept of thrashing. So thrashing can be applied in page replacement process. So thrashing is a condition in operating system where the system spends more time on swapping of the pages. So the thrashing occurs a situation or condition in the page replacement process, or we can say that paging concept. So the paging concept where the pages are loaded into the framing and where the page is going to be replaced with the new pages, all this happens in the paging concept. So here the thrashing is a situation, it occurs when the more number of times page replacement process occurs. So in simple words, when the pages are doing the swapping in more times between the RAM and disk than executing actual process. So thrashing is a condition in operating system where the system spends more time on swapping itself only. They are not executing, they are not utilizing the CPU continuously. So always they are focusing on swapping process. So more time swapping. So between the swapping occurs between RAM and disk. So whenever the page wants to load, it loads from secondary to RAM, and after completing, the page has been moved from RAM to secondary. So during this time, always the page has taken place page replacement process. Always page has taken page replacement process. So actual executing process, it takes more time to perform the swapping process. So compare with the executing process, it takes more time to perform swapping process. So in simple words, it takes too many page faults. Whenever the page replacement occurs, automatically page fault occurs. So page replacement occurs, automatically page fault occurs. So in that moment, CPU becomes busy in paging process. So continuously it is busy for page replacement process. Because of that, doing that paging process, performance becomes very slow. So here we can say that thrashing is a state also in operating system where the system spends an excessive amount of time swapping the data between physical memory RAM and secondary storage like hard disk instead of executing programming instructions. So same the defining. So we can say that thrashing is a condition, we can say that thrashing is a state, and we can say that thrashing is a situation. But only the thing is what the thrashing occurs whenever the pages have been taken place in place of swapping of the data. So they are taking place more on page replacement process rather than that executing the actual process. So if a process does not have enough frames, the page fault rate is very high. If a process does not have enough frames, the page fault rate is very high. So page fault will take place in two conditions. One is what? Whenever the frames are empty, at the time the page is loaded into the frame. So at that moment one page fault is occur. And similarly the second case is what? Whenever the page frames are full, then new page arrived to the frames, then new page is replaced with the old page. So at that moment page fault is occur. So during this entire process, page faults are increasing, page fault rate is very high. If all allocated pages are active, page replacement will leads to more page fault. So that means indirectly, whenever we are doing the more number of page replacement process, automatically the more number of page faults occur. So we have to reduce the page replacement process. So that is the main concept. The thrashing occurs whenever the more number of page replacements occurs. Automatically the thrashing condition occurs. So when the number of page faults become more, the system spends most of the time in paging activity only. So always it is looking for the page replacement process, means the system always spends most of the time to perform this paging activity. So they are not focusing on execution of the CPU, execution of the process. So this leads to the result of low CPU utilization. This leads to the result of a low CPU utilization. So whenever it is always focusing on the page replacement process, always performing on swapping process, then where is the CPU utilization continuously? So because of this issue, the thrashing occurs. So it leads to low CPU utilization. It leads to low CPU utilization. Since the CPU utilization is low, the operating system thinks that there are not enough processes to use the CPU. So no processes are ready to use the CPU. Therefore, the operating system increases the degree of multi-programming. Then comes to the concept of multi-programming. So multiple programs are executed at the time of no processes are being utilizing the CPU. Then automatically operating system searching for the multiple programs. That is concept multi-programming. That is, it adds another process to the system. So when one process is in the position to the swapping process, no other process is ready to executing the CPU process, then always operating system looking for the another process which is ready for utilizing the CPU. This increases the paging activity even further. This increases even paging activity further. So this results in thrashing, where a process spends more time on paging than executing. See this diagram. Whenever the CPU utilization is low, automatically it looking for the multiple programs. So here, once upon a time, it occurs thrashing. So whenever the more number of pages, more number of process are focused on paging activity, automatically CPU is idle. So that CPU is looking for who is requesting the CPU for utilization, that is multi-programming. So whenever the processes are increasing the paging activity, automatically at particular situation thrashing occurs. That leads to the operating system takes the degree of multi-programming. Taking the degree of multi-programming. If the currently executing process needs more frames, it takes frames currently allocated to other process. This makes the other process also to fault. Other page also making the page fault rate. So taking frames from other process. And this activity continues and leads to high paging activity. So whenever the multi-programming also increases, automatically they are also looking for the paging activity. So when the multi-programming increases, this activity continues leads to high paging activity. This decreases the CPU utilization further also. So whenever automatically the multi-programming also increased, the CPU utilization also further decreases. So the degree of multi-programming is further increased and the CPU utilization is further reduced. So that means whenever the paging activity increases, operating system looking for multi-programming. Once operating system is looking for multi-programming, and the degree of multi-programming also leads to CPU utilization further reduces. This repeated cycle of low CPU utilization, more process, more page faults occurs. So this cycle is happening for the every time, for every process, is continuously leading to the situation of thrashing. So this is the thrashing concept will works as a cycle process for each and every process. Take an example. Suppose if a RAM wants to execute and it can have 10 pages, and if you wants to run 5 process, and each need 5 pages. So total need how many pages? 25 pages. So total required how many? 20 pages. But available pages are 10 pages. So at the time, the result is what we need to do? We need to do continuous page replacement process. And no process gets enough memory, because each and every page has to replace. Because why? All available pages are getting free from the main memory. So whenever it is the main memory is free, then automatically remaining pages are utilizing the number of frames. So that leads to the thrashing situation. So more number of pages are utilizing the CPU, more number of pages are performing the paging activity continuously, automatically the situation or state comes. That state or situation is what? Thrashing. So this leads to thrashing occurs. And how to prevent thrashing? So we have some techniques, some tips to prevent the thrashing mechanism. Working set model. First one is what? Working set model. So that model simply illustrates that what allocates enough frames based on the process needs. So it states that what allocating the number of frames. So frame allocation is important. So allocating the number of frames, enough frames based on the process needs. And the second one is what? Page fault frequency. So controls page faults by adjusting the number of frames. So assigning the number of frames for each and every process. So that means one page for 2 frames or 3 frames or 4 frames depending upon the page size or depending upon the page arrives. And third one is what? Reducing the multi-programming. So limit number of process in memory. So we have to reduce the count of the process to decreasing amount of processes. And the fourth one is what? Use better page replacement algorithms. Use better page replacement algorithms. So we already have number of page replacement process, first in first out, LRU, least recently used one, and optimal page replacement. So out of these all, which gives the least recently used one, use better page replacement algorithm. And what are the causes of thrashing? So how we can say that the thrashing state occurs? Means the too many process in the memory, first of all. So whenever the process is loading into the memory and it has to reduce or avoid or disconnected from the main memory. So that means removed from the main memory after utilizing the CPU. So at the time the next process will come to the memory. So next process is ready to use the main memory, and after that finishing that memory, next the third process is also ready to utilize the CPU. So like this, too many processes are ready to use the main memory, and insufficient frames per process. So number of frames are reduced, insufficient frames are of each and every process assigned. And the poor memory utilization, poor memory allocation. So memory allocation and frame allocation is important for the processes to utilize the CPU in best way. And fourth one is what? A high degree of multi-programming. So high degree of multi-program. So it supports high number of processes to be executed. So these are the causes. These are the causes that have been occurred the state of thrashing. So too many number of processes are increasing. Number of processes are increasing to utilizing the main memory, and number of frames are reducing, number of frames are decreased or low for utilizing the CPU. And number of degree of multi-programming also leads to thrashing condition, and it leads to the cycle of the process for each and every process to continuously till the thrashing state occurs. So these are the causes that thrashing state occurs. And use the following references for more data about the thrashing concept and the number of frames concept, frame allocation concept, memory allocation concept. For all this, you can refer the following links and use the textbook and use the links for the more data about these concepts. Thank you all.
Like, share, comment, and subscribe VNR Digital Learning Resource YouTube channel.